just older than everything else. Inside were documents dating back almost 12 years. Most were ordinary. Closing costs, property taxes, home insurance. Then I noticed something odd. The owner's name on the property records wasn't Ryan. It wasn't Grace either. It was listed as the Holloway Family Trust. I frowned. A trust? Why would Ryan be paying the mortgage on a house he didn't legally own? That didn't make sense. Unless there was someone else involved. Someone I still hadn't met. I pulled out my laptop. This time, I searched something different. Michael Holloway, Lake Mercer. Several results appeared. An obituary, dated almost 12 years ago. My stomach tightened before I even clicked it. The photograph showed a man in his late 50s. Kind eyes, work shirt, sawdust on his jeans. The kind of picture someone probably insisted wasn't good enough for an obituary. I started reading. Michael Holloway, beloved husband, father, mentor, and lifelong carpenter. Father? I blinked. Father? Grace had children? Why weren't they helping her? I kept reading. The obituary mentioned 2 sons, both living out of state. One in Oregon, one in North Carolina. Neither anywhere near Lake Mercer. Then another sentence caught my attention. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the Lake Mercer Trade School Scholarship Fund. Trade school. Construction. Carpentry. A strange coincidence. Or maybe not a coincidence at all. I heard the front door open downstairs. Ryan was home. I quickly closed the laptop. Not because I was hiding what I'd found. Because I wasn't ready to confront him yet. Not until I understood more. After dinner, Ryan walked out to the mailbox. I watched from the kitchen window. He sorted through the envelopes. 1, 2, 3. Then he stopped. His shoulders stiffened. He looked down at a plain white envelope. The same mortgage company logo. He didn't open it. He didn't bring it inside. Instead, he slipped it underneath the driver's seat of his truck. Then he came back into the house, carrying only the rest of the mail. Anything important? I asked. He smiled without hesitation. Just junk. It was the smoothest lie he'd told so far, because I'd watched him tell it. Later that night, while Ryan slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling. For 6 days, I'd believed I was chasing one secret. Now I realized there were 2. The first was the house. The second was Michael Holloway. Because somehow, a man who had died 12 years earlier was still shaping every decision my husband made today. By Thursday morning, I had stopped asking myself whether Ryan was lying. He was. That part was no longer a mystery. The real question had become, why was a dead man still standing between my husband and me? I spent the morning doing something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick. Not because I was physically ill, because I couldn't spend another day pretending my mind wasn't somewhere else. Ryan kissed my forehead before leaving for work. You sure you're okay? I think I'm coming down with something. He frowned. You want me to stay home? There he was again. The man who always put me first. The man who had secretly paid another mortgage for almost 12 years. No. I forced a smile. I'll sleep. You call me if you need anything. I will. He hesitated for a second, then left. As the sound of his truck faded down the street, I picked up my purse. An hour later, I was back in Lake Mercer. This time, I wasn't interested in the house. I wanted to know who Michael Holloway had been. The obituary had mentioned that he spent nearly 40 years as a carpenter. Small towns have long memories. If Michael had lived there most of his life, someone would remember him. The first place I stopped was the bakery on Main Street. The smell of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the room. An older woman stood behind the counter arranging pastries. "What can I get you?" "A coffee, please." She poured it into a paper cup. "You passing through?" "Kind of." I hesitated. This might sound like an odd question. Do you happen to remember a man named Michael Holloway? The woman's face changed instantly. Her smile softened. "Oh, Michael." She nodded slowly. "One of the kindest men this town ever had." "You knew him?" "Knew him?" She laughed quietly. "Honey, everybody knew Michael." I carried my coffee to a small table near the window. The woman came around the counter during a slow moment and sat across from me. "He built half the front porches in this town." She smiled. "And if somebody couldn't afford to pay, he usually finished the job anyway." "Was he wealthy?" She laughed. "Lord, no. He just couldn't stand seeing people struggle." Something about that sentence reminded me painfully of Ryan. Were he and Grace happy? The woman looked surprised by the question. They adored each other. No marriage is perfect. But those two? She smiled to herself. They were partners. I thanked her for the coffee and walked back outside. As I reached my car, one thought refused to leave me. Ryan had become close to a man exactly like himself. Or maybe Michael had shaped the man Ryan eventually became. Before leaving town, I drove past the trade school mentioned in the obituary. It was small, only a few brick buildings and a workshop. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a bronze plaque near the entrance. Holloway Woodworking Lab. I stepped closer. The inscription read, "Dedicated to Michael Holloway, whose greatest craft was believing in people before they believed in themselves." I read the sentence twice. Then a voice behind me said, "He would have hated all this attention." I turned. An elderly man wearing a maintenance uniform stood holding a toolbox. He smiled when he saw me looking at the plaque. "You knew him?" "For 30 years. The man chuckled. He taught here every Tuesday night. Never accepted a paycheck. He said watching young people learn was enough. I looked back at the plaque. He sounds remarkable. He was. The man tilted his head. "You family?" "No," I answered honestly. I'm trying to understand someone who was. He nodded toward a bench beneath a maple tree. You've got a few minutes? I sat down. So, the man rested his toolbox beside him. What do you want to know? Michael. He smiled. That's a big question. I guess I searched for the right words. What kind of man was he? The old maintenance worker looked out across the workshop windows before answering. The kind who changed lives quietly. No speeches. No recognition. He just showed up. When somebody needed help, he was already there. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Because that's exactly how Ryan had always lived. Quietly. Without asking for credit. The man suddenly looked at me with curiosity. Funny thing. What? You remind me of somebody. I frowned. Who? He studied my face for another second. Ryan. Every muscle in my body tightened. You know Ryan? Oh, sure. He smiled warmly. I haven't seen him in a couple of months, but he still drops by now and then. I tried to keep my voice steady. He does? Usually on Mondays. Monday. Again. He checks on Grace. Then the old man laughed. I still remember when Michael introduced him. This kid's going to build something important one day, he said. He wasn't talking about houses. I barely whispered my next question. How long has Ryan known Grace? The man's smile faded into thought. Oh, almost 20 years now. 20 years. Ryan and I had been married 17, which meant he had known Grace before he had known me. The realization landed like a stone in my chest. Not because it proved anything, because it opened an entirely new possibility. There was a whole chapter of Ryan's life that had happened before I was ever part of it, and I had never once asked about it. As I drove away from the trade school, my phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. Hey, running a little late tonight. Don't wait for dinner. Love you. I looked at the message. Then, at the road ahead. For the first time all week, I didn't wonder whether he was lying. I wondered, what promise was important enough to survive 20 years and powerful enough to risk losing a marriage? I didn't mean to knock on Grace's door. That had been my plan all morning. Drive past the house. See if anyone was home. Leave. Simple. Instead, I found myself standing on her front porch before I'd made the decision to get out of the car. The screen door was closed. Wind chimes swayed gently above my head. I could smell fresh bread baking somewhere nearby. For one ridiculous second, I almost turned around. Then the door opened. Grace smiled. Well? She tilted her head. I was beginning to think we'd meet properly someday. My stomach tightened. You remember me? The woman who sat in the gray SUV outside my house twice? She laughed softly. Of course. My face burned. I'm so sorry. Don't be. She opened the screen door. I figured you had a reason. Not the reason. Just a reason. That surprised me. I'm Emma. I know. She answered so naturally that I almost missed it. You know my name? Grace's smile faded just enough to become thoughtful. I've known your name for a very long time. Every muscle in my body went still. She stepped aside. Would you like to come in? The house felt warm. Not expensive. Not perfectly decorated. Just lived in. The smell of cinnamon lingered in the kitchen. A knitted blanket rested over the couch. Family photographs covered an entire wall. Grace noticed me looking. My grandchildren. She smiled proudly. They visit whenever they can. I counted 6 children across different photographs. So, she wasn't alone. She had family. That only deepened the mystery. She set 2 mugs of tea on the coffee table. I wasn't sure if you preferred coffee. Tea's fine. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been following me for days. How long have you known Ryan? Grace wrapped both hands around her mug. A long time. Before he met me? Yes. How much before? She smiled faintly. Enough to remember when he had more ambition than common sense. Despite everything, I smiled. That sounded exactly like the 23-year-old Ryan I'd met. You care about him. It wasn't really a question. Grace nodded. Very much. My heartbeat quickened. In what way? She looked at me for several seconds. Then, she answered with another question. Do you know what my husband used to say? I frowned. No. He believed there are 2 kinds of family. The one you're born into, and the one life quietly gives you. She looked toward a framed photograph on the fireplace. Michael. I think Ryan became part of the second kind. I didn't know what to do with that answer. So, I asked carefully, you don't think of him as... I couldn't finish the sentence. Grace saved me. My husband? She smiled sadly. No. My son? She shook her head. No. My replacement? Again. No. She took a slow sip of tea. Some relationships don't fit into words. That wasn't an answer. It was somehow more frustrating than one. I looked at Michael's photograph. He seems like he was a good man. Grace laughed quietly. He was stubborn. So is Ryan. Exactly. She pointed toward the picture. That's probably why they loved each other. Loved. Not respected. Loved. The word lingered in the room. I met someone from the trade school yesterday. Grace smiled. Walter. You know him? I know everyone in this town. He told me Michael believed in people before they believed in themselves. Grace's eyes filled with tears. He did. He spent his whole life rescuing strays. She laughed through the tears. Broken furniture, lost dogs, teenagers. She paused. And one very angry young carpenter. Ryan. What do you mean? Grace looked down into her tea. When Ryan first walked into Michael's workshop, he was carrying more anger than tools. I frowned. Anger? She nodded. He'd had a difficult few years. He didn't trust many people. Michael saw something in him. And after that, she smiled. The two of them were almost impossible to separate. That wasn't the Ryan I knew. I'd met a confident, steady man, not an angry young carpenter. There was another chapter of his life I'd never heard. Another silence. Another omission. My phone vibrated on the table. Ryan. Calling. Grace glanced at the screen, then back at me. You should answer. I didn't move. He'll wonder where I am. Grace gave me a gentle smile. I think, she chose her words carefully, he already knows. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Grace stood and walked to the front window. She pulled the curtain back just enough for me to see outside. Parked across the street was Ryan's gray pickup. He wasn't getting out. He wasn't honking. He wasn't calling again. He was simply sitting behind the steering wheel, looking at the house. Grace let the curtain fall closed. Then she turned back to me. Her expression wasn't frightened. It wasn't guilty. It was tired. He told me this day would come. I stared at her. You knew I'd find out? Grace nodded once. I just didn't know how much. I looked toward the front door, then back at Grace. Why isn't he coming inside? Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. Because. She looked me directly in the eyes. He's more afraid of losing you than he ever was of telling you the truth. Outside, Ryan's truck remained perfectly still. Inside, for the first time all week, I realized something that hadn't occurred to me before. Ryan wasn't hiding from me anymore. He was waiting for me to decide whether I wanted the truth at all. I walked out of Grace's house with 1,000 questions. Ryan was still sitting in his truck. His hands rested on the steering wheel. The engine was off. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't trying to explain himself. He was just waiting, as if he knew this moment belonged to me, not him. I stopped beside the driver's window. He rolled it down. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. I'm sorry. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just honest. I searched his face for anger, for excuses, for manipulation. I found none. I can't do this here, I whispered. I know. I need time. I know. I'll tell you everything. He swallowed hard. But only when you're ready to hear all of it. Not part of it. Not the version that made him look good. All of it. Then he started the truck. I'll go home, He paused. You don't have to come right away. Before I could answer, he drove away. I stayed at Grace's house another few minutes. When I finally turned to leave, she stepped onto the porch. Emma? I looked back. I know this is difficult. I laughed softly. I think that's the understatement of the century. Grace smiled. Probably. She walked down the porch steps and handed me a small envelope. The paper was old, yellow around the edges. I've been keeping this for years. I frowned. What is it? Something Ryan asked me to destroy. Every instinct in my body sharpened. You didn't? She shook her head. I couldn't. Why? Because I had a feeling. She looked toward the road where Ryan had disappeared. One day you'd need to know how hard he tried. I looked down at the envelope. Across the front, in Ryan's handwriting, were 4 words. For Emma, if necessary. My heart stopped. I didn't open it in the car. I waited until I got home. The house was quiet. Ryan wasn't there. He'd kept his promise. He'd given me space. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, helped Lily with homework, planned vacations we never took. I carefully unfolded the letter. It wasn't finished. Halfway through the second page, the writing simply stopped. Emma, if you're reading this, it means I waited too long. I wish I could tell you I kept this from you because I didn't trust you. The truth is exactly the opposite. I trusted you so much that I couldn't bear the thought of watching disappointment replace the way you look at me. I blinked away tears. The next paragraph was crossed out. Completely. Ryan had scribbled over every line until the words were unreadable. Then the letter continued. I've rehearsed this conversation in my head 1,000 times. Every version ends with me hurting you. So I kept choosing tomorrow. Tomorrow became next month. Next month became another year. One day I realized I wasn't protecting our marriage anymore. I was protecting myself from the consequences of my own silence. I stopped reading. Because those words didn't sound like a liar trying to justify himself. They sounded like a man who finally understood the damage he'd done. My phone vibrated. A text from Lily. Mom, are you and Dad okay? I stared at the message. She knew something was wrong. Children always do, even when they pretend not to. I replied, We're working through something. I love you. She answered almost immediately. I love you too. Then, a few seconds later, Dad looks really sad. I closed my eyes. For the first time since finding the mortgage statement, I realized Lily wasn't just watching a mystery unfold. She was watching her parents drift apart, and she had no idea why. That evening, Ryan came home after dark. He didn't ask if I'd read the letter. He didn't ask where I'd been. He quietly made himself a sandwich, fed the dog, locked the back door. The ordinary rhythm of our life continued. Except, it wasn't ordinary anymore. As he walked past the kitchen, I spoke. Ryan. He stopped immediately. I read the letter. He nodded once. I figured. Why didn't you finish it? He looked at the floor, because I realized Letters are for people who don't have the courage to say things out loud. Silence settled between us. Then he met my eyes. I'm done hiding. I felt my heart race. He took one slow breath. Tomorrow, his voice was calm. I'll tell you everything. I searched his face. No fear, no hesitation, no escape plan. Just a man who had finally decided that whatever happened next would happen in the truth. I nodded. I'll be here. Ryan gave the smallest smile. Not hopeful, not relieved. Just grateful that I hadn't walked away before hearing him. As he turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, I looked once more at the unfinished letter lying on the table. For 12 years, Ryan had been writing versions of the same confession. Tomorrow, for the first time, he was finally going to say it. The next morning, neither of us went to work. Ryan called his office before I even came downstairs. I won't be in today. No explanation. No excuse. Just those 5 words. When he hung up, he looked at me. I've spent 12 years making the wrong decision. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. I'm not making another one. I sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy. Like 2 people standing at the edge of something they couldn't undo. Finally, Ryan took a deep breath. You deserve the truth. I do. You deserve all of it. I do. He nodded. Then don't stop me until I'm finished. I was 24 when I met Michael Holloway. His voice was calm, almost distant. As far as the world was concerned, I was doing fine. I had a job, a truck, an apartment. But the truth was, I was angry.
I frowned. Angry about what? My father. That answer surprised me. My dad left when I was 15. Ryan looked down at his hands. I decided that needing people only gave them the chance to disappoint you. So I stopped needing anyone. He smiled sadly. At least, that's what I told myself. Then one day, I was sent to Michael's workshop. He needed extra help building cabinets for the trade school. I figured I'd finish the job and leave. But Michael... Ryan laughed softly. He wouldn't let people stay strangers. He asked questions. He remembered birthdays. He invited everyone to dinner. I thought he was ridiculous. I smiled despite myself. I can picture that. So could I. Ryan looked toward the window. 6 months later, I realized he had become the closest thing I'd ever had to a father. And Grace? I asked quietly. Ryan's face softened. Grace treated every person who walked into that house like they'd already been family for years. She made too much food, forgot where she'd put her reading, and insisted every problem looked smaller after dessert. I remembered the tea, the cinnamon, the warmth. It fit. Everything fit. When you met me, Ryan continued. Michael had already been sick for almost a year. I felt my chest tighten.
You never told me. I wanted to. He looked at me. But we'd only been dating a few months. I kept thinking, I'll explain everything when life settles down. He gave a tired smile. Life never did. Ryan stood and walked to the living room. He returned carrying a small wooden box I'd never seen before. It wasn't fancy, just old, worn smooth around the edges. He placed it carefully on the table between us. I've kept this hidden since the day Michael died. He opened it. Inside were photographs, letters, a pocket knife, an old carpenter's pencil, and a hospital visitor badge with Ryan's name on it. My throat tightened. Ryan picked up the visitor badge. This was the last day I saw him. His voice barely rose above a whisper. He knew he wasn't coming home. He asked the nurses to leave the room. It was just the two of us. Ryan stared at the badge for several seconds before continuing. He said, "Ryan, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of what happens to Grace after I'm gone." I closed my eyes. I could almost hear the words. He asked me to promise him something. Ryan's fingers tightened around the badge. I thought he was going to ask me to mow the lawn, fix things around the house, check in once in a while. He looked at me. I would have said yes to anything. I nodded. I know. Ryan swallowed. But that wasn't what he asked. He looked at me and said, "Don't let her lose our home." The room fell silent. "So you bought it?" I whispered. Ryan slowly shook his head. "No. I tried everything else first. For almost a year. I helped Grace organize bills. I found financial assistance. I refinanced what I could. I even tried convincing her to sell the house. But she wouldn't. Why? Because it wasn't just a house. He smiled sadly. It was the last place where she could still hear Michael's laugh. I thought back to the swing beneath the oak tree, the flower beds, the porch. Suddenly, it wasn't just property anymore. It was memory. Ryan took another deep breath. Then, the bank sent a foreclosure notice. I felt my stomach drop. I met with them. I begged for more time. They gave us 30 days. He looked directly into my eyes. I remember driving home that night. I kept hearing Michael's voice. "Don't let her lose our home." So I made the worst and the easiest decision of my life. He reached into the wooden box, then slowly placed a folded document in front of me. It was the original mortgage agreement, signed almost 12 years earlier, and next to the borrower's signature was Ryan's name. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I didn't buy that house because I wanted another life. He paused. I bought it because I couldn't live with breaking the last promise I ever made to the man who taught me how to become one. I didn't speak. Not because I had nothing to say, because there was too much. For nearly 2 weeks, I'd imagined every possible explanation. An affair, a secret child, a gambling debt, a second family. I had prepared myself for betrayal. I hadn't prepared myself for this. Ryan sat across from me, waiting. Not defending himself. Not asking to be forgiven. Just waiting. Finally, I asked the question that had been buried beneath all the others. Why didn't you trust me? Ryan. He closed his eyes. I did. I felt my frustration rise. No. I shook my head. You didn't. If you had trusted me, I would have known 12 years ago. He nodded slowly. You're right. I confused protecting you with trusting you. They aren't the same thing. The room fell silent again. Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. Life continued. Cars passed. Birds landed on the fence. The world had no idea my marriage had just changed forever. I need you to understand something. Ryan looked at me carefully. I'm trying. I know you didn't have an affair. I know Grace isn't your secret wife. I know you loved Michael. His eyes filled with tears. But, my voice cracked. You stole 12 years from me. He didn't interrupt. 12 years of making decisions alone. 12 years of deciding what I could handle. 12 years of looking me in the eye and pretending we couldn't afford things. I laughed bitterly. I blamed inflation. I blamed bad luck. I even blamed myself for wanting a vacation. Ryan lowered his head. Every word landed exactly where it should. I missed things, I whispered. So many things. I looked around the kitchen. The bathroom remodel. Lily's graduation trip. Replacing your truck. Our 10th anniversary vacation. I looked back at him. Were all those because of the mortgage? Ryan answered honestly. Most of them. A tear rolled down my cheek. You should have let me choose. I know. We could have decided together. I know. I might have said yes. He looked up. What? I said, I might have agreed to help Grace. His entire face changed. Not relief. Shock. You would have? I don't know. I shook my head. Maybe. Maybe not. But that would have been my decision too. Ryan covered his face with both hands. For the first time since I'd known him, he cried without trying to hide it. I failed you. His voice was barely audible. I didn't fail because I helped Grace. I failed because every month I chose another payment instead of another conversation. He wiped his eyes. I kept telling myself I'd explain it after one more paycheck, then after Christmas, Then after Lily graduated, there was always another excuse. I nodded slowly. I know. No. He looked directly at me. You don't. I became addicted to postponing the truth. Those words stayed with me because they felt painfully accurate. Lies don't usually grow all at once. They grow one postponed conversation at a time. Ryan stood and walked to the kitchen window. I need to tell you one more thing. I felt my stomach tighten. There it was, the sentence every spouse dreads. One more thing. He turned around. I refinanced our house twice. I know. No. He shook his head. You don't know why. I waited. The second refinance wasn't for Grace. My heart started racing again. What do you mean? Ryan walked back to the table. I finally convinced Grace to let me sell the house. I frowned. What? 5 years ago. She agreed. But he smiled sadly. The housing market collapsed 2 weeks before closing. The buyers backed out. The repairs the bank demanded would have cost more than she had. He swallowed. So, I refinanced our home. To keep ours from going into foreclosure too. I stared at him. Our house? Yes. We almost lost it. I couldn't breathe. You never told me. I know. I was ashamed. That confession hit harder than anything else. Not because of the money. Because while I was making dinner, planning birthdays, helping Lily with homework, Ryan had been carrying the fear that we might lose everything. Alone. That afternoon, we sat together for hours. Not solving anything. Just talking. Really talking. For the first time in years. About money, fear, pride, marriage. The conversations we'd avoided, the assumptions we'd made, the burden Ryan refused to share, and the burden I never realized he was carrying. By sunset, neither of us had fixed our marriage, but for the first time, we had stopped pretending it wasn't broken. That evening, the doorbell rang. Ryan looked through the window. It's Grace. I stood beside him. Grace wasn't alone. She held a small wooden box against her chest, the same size as a family keepsake. Ryan looked at me. I didn't ask her to come. I know. I opened the door. Grace looked from Ryan to me, then quietly said, I think it's finally time. She held out the wooden box. It belongs to both of you now. I looked at Ryan. He had gone completely pale. Because whatever was inside that box, he clearly hadn't seen it before. Grace stood quietly on our front porch. The small wooden box rested carefully in her hands. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Ryan stepped aside. Come in. She smiled gently. I won't stay long. She walked to our dining table and placed the box in the center. I've been keeping this since Michael passed. Ryan frowned. I thought you threw it away. So did you. Grace looked at him with the kind of smile only someone who has known you for decades can give. You weren't ready. Then she looked at me. But I think both of you are now. Ryan lifted the lid slowly. Inside were photographs I'd never seen. Michael and Grace on their wedding day. A younger Ryan covered in sawdust, laughing beside a half-built porch. Pictures from trade school classes, Christmas dinners, cookouts, birthday cakes. There wasn't a single photo that suggested another family, only one that showed a young man who had quietly become part of someone else's. Beneath the photographs lay a sealed envelope. In faded handwriting were the words, "For Ryan and the woman he chooses to spend his life with." Ryan stared at it. His hands trembled. I've never seen this. Grace nodded. Michael finished it the night before he died. He told me not to give it to you until I believed you were both ready. Ryan looked at me. I don't think I'll ever be ready. You don't have to be, I said softly. You just have to open it. Ryan unfolded the letter. His voice shook as he began to read. Ryan, if you're holding this, then I was right about one thing. You kept your promise longer than I ever wanted you to. Ryan stopped. His eyes filled with tears. He continued. I asked you to help Grace. I never asked you to carry her alone. If helping my wife ever costs you your own, you're helping the wrong person. The room became perfectly still. Ryan covered his mouth with one hand. Grace quietly wiped away a tear. I reached across the table and took Ryan's other hand. He looked at me, devastated. I never knew. Grace shook her head. He didn't tell me he wrote that part either. Ryan kept reading. Real love isn't measured by how much you sacrifice. It's measured by how much truth survives the sacrifice. Don't become the kind of man who hides kindness from the people he loves. Secrets have a way of turning even good deeds into heavy burdens. Ryan couldn't finish. He placed the letter back into the box and lowered his head. For the first time since I'd known him, he wasn't carrying Michael's words. He was finally listening to them. Grace stood. I've held on to something else, too. She reached into her purse and slid a folded packet across the table. I looked down. It was a mortgage satisfaction statement, stamped in bold letters, paid in full. I looked up in confusion. Grace smiled. I sold the house last month. Ryan blinked. You... what? She nodded. I was finally ready. His voice cracked. You loved that house. I did. She looked toward the window. But Michael was never in the walls. He was in the people. Then she smiled at Ryan. And you've already kept your promise. Ryan stared at the document. For 12 years, every extra shift, every postponed vacation, every repair he delayed, every payment. It was over. The burden he'd carried for more than a decade was finally gone. Yet instead of relief, he looked heartbroken. "I wasted so much time," he whispered. Grace walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "No. You made one terrible mistake. You confused silence with strength. Those aren't the same thing." After Grace left, the house felt strangely quiet. Ryan and I sat together on the back porch.
No television, no phones, no distractions. Just us. "I don't expect you to forgive me today," he said quietly. "I know. I don't even know if you should." I looked at the yard where Lily had once chased Bubbles as a little girl. "You know what hurts the most?" He nodded. "That you were willing to carry all of this alone, but not willing to let me carry it with you." He closed his eyes. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know. You were protecting the version of yourself you wanted me to believe in." He didn't argue. Because he couldn't. It was true. The next few months weren't magical. Trust didn't return overnight. Some days we argued. Some days we sat in uncomfortable silence. Some days we laughed over coffee like nothing had happened. Healing wasn't a straight line. It never is. We found a marriage counselor. Not because our marriage had failed, because we wanted to stop failing it. For the first time in years, we looked at every bank account together, every bill, every debt, every fear. Nothing stayed hidden. Not anymore. The following spring, Ryan surprised me. Not with a vacation, not with jewelry, not with a grand romantic gesture. He drove me to a quiet park on the edge of town. In the back of his truck were wooden boards, tools, and a small paper bag from the local hardware store. "What are we doing?" He smiled. "Building something." We spent the afternoon building a simple wooden bench beneath a large oak tree. When we finished, Ryan took a small brass plaque from his pocket and screwed it into the backrest. It read, "Love grows stronger where truth has somewhere to sit." I ran my fingers over the words. "Michael?" Ryan nodded. He used to say something like that. We sat together until the sun began to set, not talking much, just listening to the wind move through the branches. For the first time in a long time, silence no longer felt like something heightened between us. It felt peaceful. People often ask whether I regret opening that mortgage statement. The answer surprises them. No. Because that envelope didn't destroy my marriage. It exposed the crack that had been quietly growing for years. The truth hurt us, but the secret was already doing that. If I learned anything from those 12 years, it's this. The strongest marriages aren't the ones without impossible choices. They're the ones where no one has to carry those choices alone. And every now and then, when Ryan and I drive through Lake Mercer, we take the long way home. We pass the old white house. The porch is different now. The flower beds belong to another family. The swing beneath the oak tree is gone. But every time we pass it, Ryan reaches across the center console and takes my hand. Not because he's afraid I'll leave, but because neither of us ever wants silence to speak louder than the truth again.